A massive recruiting win for Penn State and Marcus Hagans as they just flipped this player away from Virginia Tech.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That player that Penn State flipped away from Virginia Tech is Matthew Otten, somebody that they have been recruiting for quite some time and really wanted. They got him to commit to Penn State's class of 2025. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Brian Smith is back as this is a bonus segment to talk about a Penn State recruiting win. This is a massive win. He's the recruiting expert for the Locked On Podcast Network. And Matthew Otten, who is a four-star athlete, will project as a wide receiver for Penn State. But Brian, going back to our original conversations, we talked about how it was a massive loss once upon a time, 2 months ago to this point, when he committed to Virginia Tech, somebody that Penn State had prioritized and kind of questioning, okay, what's going on with wide receiver recruiting? All these dominoes are falling away from Penn State. But now you get Kobe Howard into the fold, and now you get an electrifying player in Matthew Otten. This is huge for not only Marcus Hagans, but Penn State recruiting and wide receiver recruiting in general.
This is what you call getting a guy that can change a game. I was just watching his film again. I remember talking to you about him a long time ago, and I'm like, this kid should be ranked higher. He's moved up in the rankings, but This is a kid that comes from the 757. He's from an area that always has speed, always has very versatile athletes, and he's running away from them on the gridiron. He's got some decent size, too. He's put together for a young man his age. I don't think there's any doubt he can play pretty early at Penn State. I would play him at receiver, but he could play running back or safety. He could do a lot of different things. I'm curious to see the different ways that Franklin and his staff decide to go with this, because not many guys have his physical tools all around from a speed and size perspective.
He is truly an athlete. When I look at that four-star ranking next to the ATH that's right next to his name, you mean that, and I mean that too. As he can play running back, he's going to be most likely a wide receiver at Penn State, and that's why this conversation is about wide receiver recruiting. But like you said, the talent is there for him to play a position on defense, to maybe even be a running back. He's built. He's really built well at 6 foot, 200 plus pounds, but he moves. Electrifying is the word to describe him because of that speed. Some of his best highlights are in the return game. Himself as a kick returner, as a punt returner, where he can just take the football and make one cut and go, and the speed is there for somebody at that size. So Penn State prioritized him. We know this for a fact, that Penn State had him very high up on their big board, and they end up getting this commitment to go along with Jeff Exener, to go along with Lyric Samuel, to go along with Kobe Howard. So it's been an unorthodox way of getting there rather than just kind of having it go boom, 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 one after another. It was kind of a long trail to get all the way back to now Penn State has 4 wide receiver commits that they're very content with in the class of 2025. So those conversations where we said, hey, if they get 4, that this is a really good cycle for them, and then criticize them for it when it didn't happen, but all's well that ends well, right? It's coming back around to where Penn State has accomplished its goals and then some at wide receiver.
If you can get one more guy, it'd be great, but I think this player kind of, I don't want to say disqualifies needing another one, but it certainly would limit it because he's an explosive athlete that can take over games. Now it's up to him and the staff, obviously, to figure out the position. But again, I think it'll be receiver. I think you do too. Where if he learns his craft, he can play early. There's just not enough guys like that have that kind of speed. So maybe Penn State uses that scholarship on something else. We'll see. But I think they can be picky if they go with another receiver in this class. It's got to be a really good player.
Do you like him as potentially a slot receiver or a boundary receiver better? I feel like speed anywhere works, but what would you say your preference is?
Well, to start, this is a two-part answer. You put him where it's least likely that he's going to get a lot of contact at the line of scrimmage. His technique at the line is going to be the most important thing to work on. That means boundaries the hardest. You're going against more physical guys. I think that'll be a little later. Slot makes the most sense to start out, but I don't know their depth chart for 25. If he's going to be buried there, then you got to look at it from different perspectives. He's strong enough to play outside, but right now, technically, he'd probably get mugged. And against some of the elite teams, it's just way different playing up on the line and off. To give an example, Ryan Williams, the kid that just scored the 2 touchdowns for Bama last week, the freshman All-American, he even told me last year, he goes, if you get hands on me, I'm in trouble, but if I play off, you can't do that. Nobody's going to run with me. And he's right. He averaged like 60-some yards a catch last week. That's what this kid can be like, but he's got to learn the technique to get off the scrimmage. If he does that in a year or so, you could see a player that could be really, really good for Penn State. It's just technical.
I think that's an excellent point, that he has a lot of raw potential talent, that the technique is going to take some time. So he would be a candidate if everything works out for him to enroll early so that he can start to fine tune those things. Because then again, if he does enroll early, then maybe that, that's a pathway to playing a lot sooner.
That's everything. These coaches want these kids in spring practice if they can, especially a kid like this. And you can't blame them. It's just reps. Penn State has a lot of receivers. Now it's just which ones kind of step forward, and they're pushing the pile more with this 2025 receiver corps. I think it's going to be a pretty good group after all. I know you and I were both a little weary there for a while. To say the least, they had some misses, but it's improved quite a bit. You get Kobe, you get this young man, you got speed, you got deep threats. I think Penn State's going to be in a pretty good spot now. So may the chips fall where they may after they go through practice.
And they're not finished. If you can believe that, Brian, they're not finished. So like you said, that a fourth receiver kind of checks all of the necessary boxes. If they were still able to get a fifth receiver, I mean, that would be everything and then some for Penn State. They're still going after the likes of Lex Cyrus, Taz Williams, right? It's just, it's not going to, they say, look at it this way. It's not going to be, well, we have 4 receivers, so we might as well stop talking to all of our other priority wide receiver targets. Right. No, you did what was necessary to move this class forward. I mean, this class as it stands has 24 total commits. We've seen, select players decommit or flip here and there, but now they're starting to come back around in favor. And that's what we said, Brian. Even though we were pretty critical of Penn State and the wide receiver recruiting back in, again, July, early August, and saying, okay, they're doing the bare minimum here. It's not ideal, but okay, fine. But now Penn State is in a position where we said, hey, this could be a top 10 class if they bat 1,000. Well, as it stands right now, they're batting 1,000.
Well, that's the whole point. If sometimes it takes a little longer, that's unfortunate, but you still get to where you need to go. Penn State has till the 4th of December to get all this taken care of. That's right. National Signing Day. I mean, you never know who's going to step up and how it's going to go, but like I'm looking at Harrison Wallace, the third stats, he had 117 yards this week. They proved they can move the ball around and do some things. Now, they didn't throw it as much as a lot of receivers would probably like, but West Virginia tried to take away deep shots and whatnot, and they ran the ball a little bit, and they won by 20. So I doubt Mr. Franklin cares much. They're going to have to continue to do that to attract somebody else, but at least they're trending in that right direction on the field. You and I talked about that. Yeah. Need to show it. I think Harrison Wallace might be their best recruiting tool between now and National Signing Day.
Seeing is believing, and that was something that I'm glad that you brought up, is that now under the direction of Andy Kotelnicki, Marcus Hagans is in his second full season of coaching the wide receivers and being an integral part of the right? He's in the passing game plan. His job isn't just to recruit wide receivers and then coach them. He has a say in the offensive game plan, particularly the passing as well. So for Penn State, recruiting wide receivers is going to be an uphill battle because everything up until week 1 against West Virginia was all negative.
Well, I mean, I'm sure they got hammered because if I was recruiting against Penn State, I'd have hammered them. Why would you go there? They can't throw the ball for anything. There's really nothing they could say to combat it when they played legitimate defenses. They were awful. But now that, West Virginia's may not be the, 85 Bears, but they're still a Division I and FBS program. Sure. So that's a good start. That's the only thing you can do. So, hey, this is what we've done so far. Now you build on it, and they need a 300-yard game out of Aller. They do. They need and soon. But they also need to do it against a team they're not up by 50 to get those yards. They can't just rub it in some team they should beat. The first Big Ten team they play, especially like a road game or something where ESPN's there or something, that'll be when we find out if Penn State can really throw the football because they'll be forced into it to a certain degree. And that's when recruits are going to take notice if they do. It'll be easier to flip Taz or somebody else, Lex, whatever, if they're like, oh, Okay, they just threw for 280 and 2 scores against a quality team. Maybe 310, something like that. That's what they need to finalize, in my opinion. But they're on the right track. That's all you can ask for now.
The class of 2025 is in really good shape. It could get even better with the likes of a Ty Jackson still out there intending to visit for Penn State's whiteout. He's that Florida native linebacker that's honestly one of the best linebacker in the class of 2025. Penn State is in the mix. Penn State's also strongly in the mix for Malachi Goodman, who hasn't exactly made his commitment yet, but it's down to Penn State, Auburn, and USC, and intel that I've gathered is just it's looking favorable for Penn State. Never say never in terms of, because Auburn and USC are certainly recruiting powerhouses, and Power 4 schools, as as you've mentioned, aren't going to make it easy. But Penn State is in a good spot for where they stand with those kinds of players.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what happens with them. They need to get more of the local kids again, do a little better in Jersey and PA. He would certainly help that style of recruiting that they're used to where you're from get back on track.
And Goodman, just for those who aren't familiar, we've talked about him at length with these recruiting episodes, but he is a 4-star offensive lineman, versatile, could play tackle, could play guard, out of the state of New Jersey. He is on commitment watch, and Penn State is in good standing with Goodman. We're in great standing with Brian Smith, who is the host of Locked On Seminoles. He's also the recruiting expert for the Locked On Podcast Network. All of Brian's work and his other platforms will be linked down in the description. Brian, thanks so much for catching up with me. We're outside of recruiting season, but Penn State clearly is not finished. So thank you for the time to recap all of it.
Absolutely. Looking forward to seeing you again.